Hello everyone and welcome to Art Smart. Today we're going to be talking about the plausible impossible. This is a principle that Walt Disney and the Walt Disney Animation team has utilized since really the 1930s to help make animation feel plausible to us that are watching their cartoons. Now, what is the plausible impossible? A simple definition would simply be in a fictional work, if there are things that are done that are not really possible in our physical reality, you have to at least present a plausible reason in that reality how it could happen. Now, when you look at fictional works of art, going all the way back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, people have long had fictional works that presented something that would not be possible in our reality. You would have mythology presented in art. You would have religious things that are presented in art, which we may believe on a spiritual level, but on a scientific level we have a hard time understanding. You would have things presented which do not seem to be possible in our physical reality. And it doesn't really matter when you're looking at fine art because it is a singular piece that is frozen in time. It's usually in a frame or something, and you are able to just kind of suspend your disbelief for a few minutes and just appreciate the work of art for what it is. It's not really a problem of trying to win over the belief of the audience when you have something that is fine art. But when you got to film, there was a problem that was presented very early on. The fact is, in a film, you are asked to be engaged at least for several minutes, sometimes for an hour plus in feature films, and you are presenting a new reality in many cases. And the audience has enough time to sit and engage in the film and start asking questions of themselves. Could this really happen? That seems like it's a little far-fetched to me. What happened there to that character couldn't happen in our reality. Could that really happen there? People have time to sit and think about what they're seeing and say to themselves, this is believable and this is not. And this created some problems for the Disney animators, but we'll get to that in a second. Historically, films in the early going of the early 1900s were able to sidestep the issue of the plausible impossible. The reason is, one, most of the films were pretty grounded in reality to begin with. Most films didn't have tons of special effects because special effects were really being developed. When you did get to films like The Lost World in 1925, and I guess like King Kong, films like that in the early 30s, you would have a lot of special effects which would be kind of hard for us to believe in reality. However, at that point, people weren't asking too many questions about is this plausible or not, because quite frankly, they were amazed by the special effects. Early audiences were not nearly as sophisticated, so they pretty much believed most of what they saw in these special effects and on the screen, and if it wasn't believable, who cares? It was still cool to look at. So the issue was mainly sidestepped. In early animation, there was a lot of impossible things happening that audiences in the beginning accepted. When you look at Felix the Cat in his early cartoons, Felix would do things like take off his tail and use it as a I don't know, many different things. He would use this as a helicopter above his head. He would use his tail to grab things. He would sometimes like ride on it like a pogo stick. Felix would do all kinds of impossible things. And in the early days, people pretty much accepted it because it was fun and it was cartoony and it was just kind of a whimsical thing. However, audiences quickly grew tired of that type of animation. Walt Disney had a character named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit that had a lot of these same characteristics. He would do impossible things, and it would be okay in the early days of animation becoming popular in the 1920s. However, as audiences grew more sophisticated, they began to get tired of seeing these things which were not grounded at all in reality. Audiences, after the first dozen or so of these cartoons, would start saying, when am I going to see a story that is actually engaging and I feel I can really watch and sink my teeth into? So by the time you get to the early 1930s and Disney had become quite popular with audiences, there had become this new impetus to try and actually present films that felt grounded in some sort of reality. Now, cartoons are always going to have some exaggeration, especially when you have cartoon animal that are humanized, like Mickey Mouse. A mouse cannot do what Mickey does. However, when you are looking at a cartoon film, if they make it feel plausible that Mickey is high enough to reach certain tables, that Mickey has hands, if they make it plausible that if a mouse could be that big, that he could interact with this world in a certain way, the audience will at least be able to suspend their disbelief for a period of time. Disney really worked hard at this particular practice. They figured out certain things would make their cartoons a little bit more plausible to audiences. One, they had to work on anatomy and make their characters look like they actually had bones. And that's something that they had to work hard on, especially with humanized characters. And it took them quite a bit of time. The second thing is that they worked on squash and stretch. Squash and stretch is basically the fact that if you have, I don't know, like a ball or a sack or something, and you throw it and it hits the wall, it does squash and then stretch out as it hits that wall and ricochets, and that creates at least a sense of reality, that that there is a physical reaction when one object hits another. And so cartoons started to really work at that, at trying to say, okay, in this cartoon reality, what are the physical rules of it? You'll see in a lot of cartoons that a hammer may come down and hit a character in the head comically, and they're fine. And that's because in cartoons they figured out the squash and stretch makes it believable that a character could receive that type of blunt force. However, you don't oftentimes see something that's piercing, like a stake, a knife or something, go into a character. Why? Because that would pierce a character, and that would break that plausible reality. So cartoons have created these rules over time. Another one, of course, is the character that walks off of a cliff, and when he looks down is when the character actually falls. That is because we say in this reality, the character is being emotionally driven. So what is really making them fall down is when they realize that they're going to fall down. In this physical reality, they are emphasizing the emotion of the character and not the physicality of the universe. But these things have to be established in a cartoon. Some of the worst cartoons, I think, are ones where there's just nonsense that happens in a cartoon. And it has to feel plausible that the character could do what it is doing. And I'm going to show you a few images here of things that I think that are kind of implausible in a cartoon, and which makes them not all that enjoyable to watch. A lot of times the Terrytoons cartoons would have the characters do things nonsensically, and it would make it a lot less engaging to the audience. Another problem that a lot of cartoons would have, and Disney really worked hard at, was the characters sometimes would do things without any motivation. Walter Lantz cartoons sometimes get flack because Woody Woodpecker is kind of nasty to other characters, and in some of the cartoons it's not really made clear why it's okay for him to be so nasty. While in the Disney cartoons and in like Warner Brothers, they figured out that you have to make it plausible that the character would be doing all these kind of mean-spirited things. For example, Bugs Bunny, he has to have Elmer Fudd put a gun in his face and saying, I'm going to go hunting a rabbit, in order for us to feel okay with Bugs just kind of pummeling him with all kinds of jokes. If Bugs didn't have the gun in his face, he wouldn't be funny, because it wouldn't feel plausible that he would actually have all this room to retaliate against Elmer Fudd. The plausible impossible is a really, really important principle when it comes to animation. It's something you should learn about. I'm also going to put down in the item description at the bottom a link to Walt Disney actually talking about this himself in one of his Disneyland episodes. Hopefully this makes you a little bit more art smart. You understand your cartoons a little bit better, and if you're making your own films, you'll work to make it a little bit more plausible in its impossibility. Have a great day. Bye-bye.